Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you all for inviting me, asking me to speak. Uh, I I understand that first of all, it's a great honor to be addressing you all on this joyous and very important day. But when Ganesha in fact asked me, I was also a bit reluctant because I understand that it's not just an honor to be able to speak on this day, but it's also a big responsibility. And I use the word responsibility because I understand fully well what this day means to the millions who come before us. I understand fully well what this day means to all of us today. And given the fact that this seems to be just the very beginning of the varied entailments that the work and life of Baba Sahib Ambedkar seems to have unfolded, we can only wait and see what Ambedkar will mean to the millions who will come after us. So I speak with that responsibility today. Uh, Someone before me spoke about hope. I think the most important thing that one can generate in another is a hope. And I think the hope becomes all the more radical if it comes from someone whose life has been crowded with constructions and constructions of impediment. And that has been the life that the people who've been called all kinds of names in our past and today we call Dalits have experienced. And I think the kind of hope that Ambedkar invokes is not just to strive for conditions that would create hope, but I think he asks of us, he kind of makes a moral demand of us to also redefine what it is to be hoped for. Professor Ratanlal Sonagara, who's a Marathi writer, he tells a story of when once Ambedkar was addressing a gathering of sweeper community in the Bombay municipality. And he recounts that Ambedkar said that when a woman from our community is pregnant, she looks at the Mokadam, who's the head of the sweepers, and she thinks that by the time my child grows, this Mokadam should die and my child should get his post. And he points to the fact that this is this is a mark of telling us that not only has years and years of the caste system robbed us of our lives, but it has also robbed us of the very imagination that we can project even in our prayers and hopes and dreams. And I don't think it's just saying that this kind of hoping is selfish, right? It's not that kind of criticism to say that this is a very limited dream, dream for something that is a higher material dream. I think he's saying that this kind of dream can only come when the fabric of our moral beings is corrupted. And he demands more when one is dreaming of what one should hope for. And in that I think he is a deeply, deeply moral thinker. Adrian Rich, the American poet, says that responsibility to ourselves first of all means that we refuse to give anyone else the right to do our thinking and our naming for us. We don't give anyone the right to treat our bodies as objects, and we don't let ourselves do that for a superficial intimacy or for economic gain. And I think for Ambedkar that responsibility is not just a responsibility that you have to yourself, but a responsibility you have to others as well. And in that, he is not just a moral thinker, but he is also a thinker who combats individualism of that sort. And therefore, I think it's funny. I teach a course in which I discuss merit in my class. I have a lot of students who come to me and say that they want to work on Ambedkar. And invariably, they are tempted to, they find themselves forced to defend Ambedkar, to defend, and say how great he is, right? To defend his greatness or to defend affirmative action. And I think, and I make it a point that at least in my class, the burden of proof now has to be shifted to the other side. You prove to us why he is not great. I think it's high time that we should shift that burden of proof. And of course, once you shift that burden of proof, there are dangers. There are dangers of appropriation. We live in a time when probably the danger of appropriation is quite a bit large. It's in our face. But that appropriation, I don't think is just a mischaracterization or a wrong characterization. What I mean is, you have a kind of Sarkari Ambedkar whose edges are softened off, right? You have an Ambedkar who's made palatable for the tastes of the masses, so to say. But of course, Baba Saheb himself doesn't lend himself very easily to that kind of smoothening of edges. The force of his radicalness is such that it doesn't lend itself easily to that kind of a treatment. Nevertheless, I think it's wrong to think of this as mischaracterization. It is an alternative characterization. It is an other characterization, and it's a characterization that is very loud, that is very easy. And therefore, when we organize and when we educate, one also has to be very aware of these alternative characterizations and how to think and counter them. I don't want to make this, of course, into a class, but I just want to say that, we live in a time when there is, it is fashionable. We live in a time where we speak of decolonization of theory. And of course, we have its translation in politics as well. I don't think I need to tell you that this kind of talk of decolonization, of politics, of foreign policy is not a mere rhetoric. It's a real thing, and it's going to hit us. But so far as decolonization of theory is concerned, I think that it's a noble goal to be able to critique modernity. I think it's a noble academic work to be able to critique the mentalities that follow from modernity, from colonialism, from the Industrial Revolution and such. But what that inevitably also does is that it brackets a lot of anti-caste thinking into, just borrowing these concepts, especially methods, tools of critique, such as reason, such as history, etc., and simply applying them. As if all that anti-caste thinking does is wakes up to this enlightenment which is brought to us by the colonialists and applies it to their own society. So at the worst, they are made into these thinkers who just borrow Western concepts, and at best they are seen as people who have something to say to the context, right? So India has a context in which there is caste inequality, and therefore the Phule and the Periyars and the Ambedkars are relevant here. But I think as an intellectual project and as a political project, what is also important is to rescue not just the morality, the ethical force of Ambedkar, but also I think the universality in Ambedkar. Right, and I'll just give two examples in stock. So if one looks at the kind of critique of, let's say, Enlightenment methodology, etc., that comes our way, the idea is that you have these methodological tools of reason, of history, as if they are tools of epistemic violence, and therefore what we should go back to is a very vague notion of authenticity and indigeneity. And one when is facing that kind of an attack, and I repeat myself, it is not just in academics, it is also in politics, it is not very subtle, so I think it is very difficult to miss. What Ambedkar gives us is a much more complex and rich repertoire of even epistemological tools, right? Uh, if one looks at his works, and I have something here from his 1934 work, Ranade, Gandhi and Jinnah, right? And he speaks to this separation of sorts of the political and sociological. Right? He says that those who understand politics, not just in India, it is not a question of context. He says those who think that they understand the political have to understand something very important about the relationship of the political and sociological. So I'll just read a bit. He says, in the first place, it could be said that we want political power first because we want to protect the rights of the people. This answer proceeds from a very frugal theory of government, as was propounded by the American statesman Jefferson, according to whom politics was only an affair of policy by the state, so that the rights of the people were maintained without disturbance. Assume that the theory is a sound one. The question is, what is there for the state to police if there are no rights? So he is clearly stating that if there are no rights in this authenticity, indigeneity, etc. to begin with, if there is nothing to protect in the sociological so that it is translated into political, it makes really no sense for the anti-colonialist thinkers, the nationalist thinkers of his time who were arguing for the spiritualization of the social and its protection from the colonial political to work through. He also gives a very important insight for us to think about self-government versus good government. And he's very clear that self-government, Swaraj, by no means translates very easily or readily into good government. Right? So just autonomy is not sufficient. And he does that in annihilation of caste, he does that in what Congress and Gandhi have done to the untouchables. And I think in saying all of that, he makes us ask a very important question, which is to say, what really should count as a tradition that is worth saving, right? And for him, anything that is there in Hinduism was not a tradition that was worth saving. And I bring to this all of you because I see a lot of promise, I see a lot of hope in all of you, and I think, of course, today is a day of a lot of celebration, and I thought I could flag these as projects that all of you take up politically, intellectually, and in your personal social lives, and take them forward. To end with, I would just say that maybe a lot of you know, in 1937, Ambedkar contested in the Bombay presidency, and his Chunav Chin, the
symbol.
What is it called in Hindi? The
Symbol.
Symbol, right. So the symbol, election symbol with which he contested was a man. The word used in Marathi is manus, human. So he contested on a symbol of a human. And I think if we want to do justice and if we want to really call ourselves, even as people who understand Ambedkar, we also have to understand these imports of Ambedkar, which are and can be very easily sidelined. So with that, I thank you all again. Jai Bhim, and very happy Ambedkar. Thank you.